All right, good morning, everyone. So, performance. We all want it. That is why we're here, but of course there are different ways to achieve it, and that depends on what channel you're activating on. So today we're going to talk about TV, both linear and CTV, and how to activate your first-party data on those channels to get the best results. As was mentioned, I'm Ryan Joe. I'm the editor-in-chief of Adweek, and I would like to introduce my, my panelists. Applaud. Thank you. All right, so with me are Dave and Kaitie, and I'm gonna let them introduce themselves, what they do, and where they work. Kaitie, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Kaitie Coghlan. I'm a senior vice president at NBCUniversal. I'm responsible for our data product, including audiences and our identity graph, as well as our data partnerships.
Hi, Dave Krenn, VP of Data Strategy and Partnerships at Paramount. Mainly, I am in charge with pushing forward the strategy around our identity solutions, our data partnerships, our always-on attribution solution, and pretty much anything else within the realm of advanced advertising that's needed at the moment.
Great. So first question actually comes from the audience. Surprise, surprise. What do we mean when we say the small screen, Kaitie?
Yeah, I've been asked that for the first time about 5 minutes ago as well. So the way I think about the small screen is all of our devices and all of the screens, whether it's a tablet, a phone, a television, and how we're using those screens to interact with media.
Dave?
You know, the title of this thing baffled me from the moment I saw it. Paramount, we're mostly a CTV space, and I would think that we consider that the large screen, but I guess in regard it is smaller than some screens if we're talking about movie theaters and other things, but not totally sure.
All right, screens that are smaller than a movie theaters, basically. All right, so let's talk about using first-party data on these small screens. Just to start out, are a majority of advertisers doing it right now, Kaitie?
I think we're seeing an increasing number of advertisers wanting to utilize their first-party data and match with our through our identity graph and our first-party data. When you're an advertiser, this data is so important to you, and you want to be able to use your consumer data and then add to that prospect data. And so we create a lot of interoperability solutions so we can match with resolution partners, or we can match with our own identity graph in secure ways, such as clean rooms, or through resolution partners, so we can take in that advertiser data and be able to utilize it with our data, with third-party data, and have the most effective campaign.
How about Dave, from your perspective at Paramount, are most of your advertiser clients bringing the first-party data, or is it still relatively rare?
So I wouldn't use the term most, but I would say it's definitely a growing piece of the pie. I don't think it's necessarily new and novel for clients to be using first-party data. For a long time, they've collaborated with their agency partners or big data providers to use that as an input to a larger sort of like segment, kind of to what Kaitie was talking about. I think what's a more recent uptick is the desire to go directly to the publisher or to the source with that first-party data, and new technologies, I know we'll get into with like clean rooms and stuff, make that more feasible than it ever has been before.
Got it. Sorry, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I would say I agree with what you're saying, and I think we've taken an investment over the past few years to not only build out our own first-party assets so we can create second-party audiences with our advertisers, but also really building out our identity graph and using the consumer signals that we see tied to an NBCU ID. We span 210 million individuals, 90 million households, and when we're able to use the power of our identity graph to match to our advertiser data, we can get the most or the highest match efficacy. And I think that is what we're seeing increasing as well, these investments that as publishers we're making in our technologies and our in-house solutions.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, Paramount and NBC, I think, has very similar strategies when it comes to that. We have a lot of our own first-party data that allows for better efficacy of the audiences that come, and you're doing better matches and things. So totally agree.
So when they're making better matches, is it for the purposes of targeting? Is it the purposes of measurement? Is it kind of all of the above, or is there some other benefit that that isn't as well known?
I think it's all of the above. It's also allows us to, when we have advertisers who are really looking to have like hyper-targeted campaigns, it allows us to create customer profiles, tie them to our customer journey where we have the overlap between our data sets, custom analytics, and then, of course, always drawing that back to outcomes data so we can understand how the campaign performed, our media performed, and the value that we're offering to the advertiser.
Yeah, I agree. The pivot that Paramount has made, especially this year, is providing outcome data for all campaigns. And when you're doing that, you want to really make sure that the KPIs you're looking for upfront in the campaign are more tied to audience fidelity, accuracy, because that's going to show up in the outcome data. For years, we were always pushing just like, what is the match rate? What is the scale? And like, I think collectively over the last couple of years, the industry has gotten a lot smarter that is not the be-all, end-all of this. And like, as we continue to push for outcomes tied to actual campaigns instead of just measuring media metrics, all of that is actually shown in the data.
When we say outcomes, are you referring to whether I hit the audience I wanted to hit, or are you referring to like, okay, that, but also it drove sales, or it drove some other metric that I really wanted?
So I'm talking about real world outcomes when I say that. I think the way technology is set up, if you are being sent an audience to hit, you should be hitting that audience. There's something broken fundamentally if you're not. The reality is what we're talking about is like, can we start measuring at scale, is this moving the needle to some KPI that the client actually cares about, whether that just be overall awareness, whether that be actual sales lift. And we've recently started taking a look at sort of whether the way the audience is created and how it comes to us actually has effect on those outcomes. And we're seeing like pretty significant lifts in direct shared first-party segments from advertisers and agency partners that are seeing 20, 30, 40% higher outcome lift than more generic third-party marketplace segments that would have previously been used. So it's bearing fruit.
Kaitie, you look like you're on the verge of saying something.
It's such a loaded question, but yeah, I would agree. We care about real-world outcomes. I think back 10 years ago, we talked about match rates and how many cookies you have, and it really doesn't matter if you have 1 billion cookies if you can only find 100,000 of them, right? So being integrated with technology solutions like UID2 or these authenticated solutions that are in the market helps us find the target in a one-to-one basis. It eliminates ad waste. It lets the advertisers' dollars go farther. So these types of technological advances really allows us to take in more KPIs that the advertisers are looking for. And then, yes, we want to tie it to sales lift. You found the person, did they buy? Like, that's what we care about.
Got it. I want to kind of talk about deploying across like linear, CTV, cable, because you guys both have all three of those, maybe. Is that, when you deploy first-party data, can you kind of deploy across all of those different those different areas?
Well, yes. When we're using first-party data, whether it's our own or our advertisers, it gets us into spaces that can be restricted. So with third-party Apple opt-outs, for example, when we're able to use our first-party data set, that opens up that inventory for us. So that creates more for our advertisers. We get asked increasingly about cross-screen measurement. And if you think about it, as an advertiser, I don't know if they necessarily care where their ad is showing or the consumption of that ad, and parsing it out into the silos that the industry parses it out into. As industry, we talk about linear, we talk about CTV, but really, what I think our advertisers care about is that holistic effectiveness of the media and of their campaign. So it's interesting because, yeah, we talk about it in silos, but in reality, we care about the full 360.
Yeah, and agree with that. At Paramount, we have spent a lot over the last couple of years investing in the Paramount ID framework, which is a combination of our first-party data assets and third-party data providers to give us census-level scale and understanding that we can match and push and receive back data from all of our various endpoints, whether that be broadcast, cable, linear, set-top box addressable, digital, CTV. And it allows us to do a lot more interesting things with buys that come in if the buyer wants to do it. So you're talking about in-campaign, cross-platform reach frequency management. You're talking about future state outcome optimization as you start actually seeing outcome data within the actual campaign. And we're also doing connectivity directly with all of those different partners, whether it be direct crosswalks or clean rooms, so that you are limiting the waste and sort of transformation of those audiences when they get to all the various endpoints. That's what we can do in-house. On top of that, we have set up clean room connectivity with most of the major currency providers so that you could measure your campaigns convergently across all of Paramount in a very seamless fashion, and it doesn't become a whole science project that you have to ship files out, hope that they got there, and wait for a result at the end of the day.
Got it. I definitely want to get to clean rooms, but before I do, I was just kind of wondering, like, what is one of the coolest activations using first-party data that you guys have seen maybe over the past year, Kaitie?
Yeah, we sit on a wealth of data, of course, at NBCUniversal. I think one of the more creative solutions that we've brought to market is in our Spanish-speaking targeting sets. And so we have advertisers who want to serve Spanish language ads in English content, and they want that to be precise. That is where accuracy really matters. And because we sit on Telemundo and we sit on user settings within Peacock, we're able to create really, really targeted Spanish language audiences where we're fairly certain there's a Spanish speaker in that household. And then we can combine it with the first-party data that our advertisers are bringing. Because we have a very accurate, we need this audience to be very accurate, we offer targeting packages that target the audience first, and then we'll target content second for scale. And so I think that's one of the more unique ways that we've been able to use our first-party data and our customer first-party data plus our content to create a well-informed targeting package.
How about Dave? How about for you?
So I think about it from a client first-party data perspective, where we've had some major QSR clients essentially collaborate with us on different targeting strategies to understand what is the right targeting strategy to move the outcome results at the end of the day. So is it better to build a modeled audience of the known consumers? Is it better to build a target of all non-consumers? Like, what are you gonna see a better lift? And those types of things where we work in partnership with brands, I think is really effective at trying to collaboratively drive better outcomes, which is ultimately what we're trying to do.
Got it. So if I'm an advertiser, what do I need to do if I want to activate my first party data? What are some things that I need to kind of get in order in my house if I'm going to come to you?
I would start with partitioning out your data sets. Are you doing an acquire campaign? Are you doing a win back? Are you looking for net new? And then working with, we'll meet our advertisers at whatever platform and collaboration partner they want to use, which is why interoperability is so important to us. And we've spent the past few years integrating with clean rooms and CDPs and creating server-to-server integrations. But yeah, I think you're an advertiser, you're getting started. How do you want to segment your data? And then what do you want to learn from us? Because we can help fill in the customer profile, the customer journey based on the signals and the behaviors that we've observed within our O&O.
Yeah, I agree. I think the most effective client engagement we have is when they're coming to the table with a POV on exactly what they want to do. And I think the most ineffective is when they are coming with a number of hems that they have access to and saying execute. I think beyond that, I think we get a lot of like, hey, can you model this for us? And yes, we can. However, I don't know if it's best practices to really trust the endpoint publisher to model, because you're now going to have multiple iterations of your audience across every various endpoint you have. So like centralize that function, whether it be within your own company or with a third party that you trust to do it, I think it would be the advice that I would give.
Got it. And then, okay, so what happens next? We've got my data in order. I'm coming to you. Like, do we put it in a clean room? How do you guys kind of get a peek at that and activate off of that?
Yeah, I think clean rooms, we've been talking about them for years. So they're not necessarily new technology, although the advancements made in clean room technology are new. Technology often outpaces legislation, it outpaces strategy, it outpaces skill sets. So, flash forward 3-4 years and we're still talking about clean rooms, but there's a comfortability now and an understanding, I think is also really important, for all the players in the space to collaborate, whether it's cross-publisher, it's outcomes data. We used to server to server our impressions off to whether it was a measurement partner or the advertiser or the agency, and I kind of likened that to sending a child off to school and never getting a report card, But this is the ask of our advertisers, and so we will meet them there. But with clean room technologies, being able to collaborate and help our advertisers write templates, we're part of the conversation, and we can also tweak our media and our media plans based on what we learn. And it also breaks down the silos. We'd love to think that all our advertisers only want to buy NBCU media, but we know that they're buying media across the board. And so being able to have a friendly relationship with other publishers and the ability to have that data collaborate on behalf of the betterment of our advertisers is something that I think is really cool, and we're seeing it pop up a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I agree with almost everything Kaitie's saying. So I would just add to it, like, from a Paramount perspective, and we're probably not alone in this, if someone wants to use first-party data, my team's role is to make sure that we have the right setup and paperwork in place, that whatever path that they want to do to activate on that, we can support it. And what that means is it doesn't necessarily have to be a direct connection. If they want to just dabble in it at first and use a regular third-party onboarder, in terms of collaboration, I also give a shout out to OpenAP, where we long ago as competitors came together across the industry to set up one centralized location so people actually could get their audience right in that one location and then pass it to all publishers and feel confident that it's the same reflection of the audience across all. It really depends on where a client is in that journey. And I would also say, I think clean rooms, not to keep bringing it up before you're actually bringing it up, but clean rooms have done a good job at now creating many flavors. I think in the beginning, people would be overwhelmed. We would go to the market with, we'll make it the setup whatever you want. And in reality, it becomes that thing that there's a reason there are menus and curated menus. A lot of times people I want option 1 or option 2 or option 3. And there's a lot more things in the space now that provide an easier first step into that world. And then as you get more sophisticated, you can evolve into something that is catered directly to exactly what you want.
So having that clean room relationship, it's just a tool. Is it necessary, or is it just a tool that can kind of just make things easier as you activate?
I don't think it's necessary, but it certainly helps make more direct collaboration easier to happen.
It's not necessary today, but I think it will be as the industry evolves, as more consumer privacy laws come into play, as more internal by advertiser, by publisher, our own privacy policies come into play. I think it'll be a necessary integration that we all need to have in order to keep our consumer data, their consumer data, our consumer data, as protected as possible. And that's kind of the beauty of clean rooms, is not only does it break down silos where we're comfortable with, we aren't giving up control. No one's giving up control. Everyone owns a piece of the data pie. But we're giving access, and we're receiving access. And I think, again, not necessary today, but I think in a few years, it's going to be the way in which we all work.
And I would agree with that. I think I'm glad that we're doing it now before we have to, so that we're ready when we do.
Got it. So basically, it's going to be necessary to help kind of navigate that minefield of regulation that inevitably will come.
Yeah, and our customers deserve that. Our consumers deserve that type of protection, and the type of technology advancements that help us protect our consumer data and the data that we're handling.
Got it. So, once I've kind of brought you my first-party data, we're activating on it, how can I really maximize impact?
Having your outcome data. So whether you're capturing it yourself, whether it's coming in through like a CAPI, or you're aggregating it at a point of sale, or you're partnering either with us, who partners with outcomes data providers such as EDO or Coachava, or the CPG data providers. We can bring the best outcomes data to the table, and then as an advertiser, having your outcomes data, again, whether it's a web visit or an actual transaction, and being able to match and marry all these data sets, so we can tell you, or you can tell yourself, because we've helped you with that collaboration, what the impact of your media spend was.
Got it.
Yeah, and I would say the beauty of where we are right now with the technology is that you can get those insights a lot faster. So 5 years ago, I was doing custom attribution reporting. 3 months after campaign end, we'd be putting in front of the agency talking about what happened. Another month later, we'd be in front of the client, and the client would be like, all right, well, I've already moved on to whatever my next strategy is. This is nice and all. So now, with all of this partner connectivity, I mean, Paramount is set up that we have our own partnership, similar to what Kaitie had mentioned. We also set up an always-on exposure table, so that if an advertiser has their own first-party data that they want to match against to bring to outcome, like, it is there and ready to go. And they can use it just because they purchased Paramount. There's no added upcharge. It's just all part of the experience, which is sounds simple, but like it's a big difference than where we were 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, it's an infrastructure that we need to create with our data partners to be able to meet our advertisers where they are. And if we have an agreement in place, that also cuts down the time that our advertisers need in order to receive this data.
If I'm activating on first-party data, does it scale particularly well? Is that an issue?
Having run a data business for 8 years, a third-party data business, you do need third-party data. I don't think it's ever going to go away. I think with legislation and with using first-party data, the bad actors will start to go away, and the good third-party data providers, they are already rising to the top. So first-party data is fantastic for accuracy. I love the idea of waterfalling then to a highly accurate third-party data set for scale. And like the beauty of that, when an advertiser is using their first-party data, we're using ours, we have the controls. So we can model it out, we can model it down, and then we can supplement with, like I said, very good third-party data providers, and they are out there to create a scaled audience.
Yeah, very few outside of the big tech giants have enough first-party data to do actual national scaled. So if you're a client out there who's thinking, I don't have enough data, like, you're not alone. Everyone has a smaller subset view into their customer. But where we are, knowing your first-party data, to the point Kaitie made, it is the most accurate data that you can trust if you are dealing with it properly. You can use that to have your finger on the lever and make sure you're only adding in what you need to add in to feel comfortable with the buy. I will say, we don't like to talk a ton about national linear execution anymore, but that is a place that if you have a smaller first-party data set and you want to execute against it, you're still getting the national spill of scale. So in the belief that birds of the same feather flock together, like, you are probably having an effective campaign, even if theoretically, if you were to activate that in a one-to-one environment, you might be missing out on a lot of core customers because you're only hitting people within that subset. So there's a way to marry both of those mediums to have a better strategy.
Do you have any advice on how to marry those mediums and how to vet a third-party data provider?
So when we look at vetting third-party data providers, we use our first-party data as essentially our truth set. And it allows us to look deeply at what connections they have made, how accurate we believe they are based on what we're seeing. and it just makes for a better way to understand that difference between accuracy versus scale. In terms of how to execute across all of this, I mean, we like to think you have your targeted national buy, and then the way we work on it, we are then optimizing for those on the one-to-one space we think you're not going to find in a national space. And we're doing a constant feedback loop to measure frequency across at a household level, trying to make sure that however that person is consuming Paramount content is not being over frequency across the entire campaign. And all of that can only happen if you have aligned your buying strategies to be one holistic buying strategy, and you're not siloing it into this is my TV buy, this is my digital buy, this is my programmatic buy. So it takes a little bit of restructuring to necessarily do that in the way that Paramount could bring the best value to the table.
I also think from a partnership perspective, there are very good marketplaces out there, and LiveRamp Marketplace, Kaitie Marketplace, and these teams are not incentivized to sell a certain data set. So they can be very consultative to advertisers and really dig into what third-party data set would be most beneficial. And then, of course, as publishers, we partner with them as well. So to your point, we're also using our first-party data to validate the third-party sources that are being chosen and used. But I don't want to dismiss the experts who work in the data marketplaces, because they can be very good and prescriptive at advising which data sets to use.
Got it. So I was told we have to end with go-dos, where you guys have to suggest to the audience things that they should go do. Dave?
Sure. I mean, a few things that I would say as we make this transition to predominantly CTV being the major player, at least from a Paramount eye, people need to start thinking about their executions as a household level execution. A CTV device is not a personal device. It is a household device, but people are still trying to think of digital executions as they've been done in the past on a mobile phone, on a desktop. So like the more you can marry the medium to your targeting strategy, I think the better off you'll be. The other thing I would say is lean in with your endpoints, with your end inventory endpoints, because we have a lot to offer. We've invested heavily to test and learn with you. And you're missing out on that opportunity if you want to buy from a more centralized location.
I would say everyone should triple down on their upfront buys, but in all seriousness, I think the more comfortable, whether it's your agency or you as the advertiser, can be with data collaboration, and again, you can set your own rules. I think that is a really interesting path forward to marry all the touch points, all the actors that you're working with, and the outcomes data, which again, we ultimately care about, and then the next campaign and the next campaign and the next campaign is only gonna get better.
And I would say, well, I mean, they come to you for advice, but I would just say after, when this conference is over, when you're done with all the networking, and if you want to get out of this part of town, go to Golden Gate Park, rent a bike out to the ocean. It's a really nice palate cleanser.